My guest is Dan Avnon. He's director of the Fetterman School of Public Policy and Government. Welcome to the show, Dan.
Thanks, Alan.
An old friend, welcome to have you back. Dan, tell me what you do at the school.
The Fetterman School of Public Policy creates the academic background for enhancing public servants. Basically, we need a strong civil service. The government does not have training programs. We provide the top quality policy officials in Israeli government. The school has been around for 10 years. You know, you always boast, when you wanted to present a school, you talk about your graduates. Our prime graduate heads the budgetary office in the Ministry of Finance.
Should give you more money for your school?
We're working on it. Yeah, the this is Israel, a budding democracy. Alumni associations, so everything here has yet to be done. We're not Canada, but we're working on it.
Well, you say you're not Canada, and that's what I want to talk about.
Yeah.
I want us to spend time on multiculturalism in Canada versus multiculturalism in Israel. And you know something about both. How would you summarize the difference?
Well, the first primary difference, and it's a matter of language and also of history. Canada is a country that accepts refugees or immigrants as a matter of cultural, historical, and political fact. Canada is that kind of country. In Israel, we're not a universal immigrant country. We are a country, the state was established as a nation state of the Jews. Immigration in that respect applies only to certain people, and other people who want to be part of this nation state have to undergo a kind of criteria that is not comparable to what happens in Canada. Canada, there's certain neutrality regarding your origin. Here, you have to be Jewish.
Well, you don't have to. Well, it's not quite true, is it? Because if I'm a Christian, I can immigrate to Israel, but you don't get an automatic entry. It's a different stream.
Look, the automatic citizenship granted to Jews is something very unique on this planet. Yeah. Of course, we take it. I'm a Zionist. My family's been here for many generations. I have no quibble with Israel as a Jewish state in terms of being the state of the Jewish people. So you won't pick a fight with me on that. But what is very clear is that Jews get access by the logic of the state, and others undergo criteria that is not comparable to Canadian immigration. And we're talking comparison because you say a word, people say multicultural Canada, multicultural Israel. It's not the same, and we cannot pretend that it is. Because here there is a major, dominant cultural ethnic, religious group, Jews, and the state is a Jewish state, and those who are not Jews are in a dialogue, individually or as groups, with the dominant majority.
Is there some parallel, though, with Quebec? Because in Quebec, you have a dominant majority that wants to retain its own entity, can't draw on the rest of the world, really, though tries to draw on Francophone speakers, but has the problem of assimilating non-Francophones into what it wants as the Francophone community, which it sees as in somewhat danger.
Well, it's a very interesting comparison. I'm sorry to complicate matters.
No,
Canada is a federation and we are not. We're a unitary state. So the issue in Canada where you have Quebec, which is a separate province, and it has its own political framework and its own political give and take with other provinces, is not the same as in Israel. However, we do learn from the Canadian and the Quebecois history, and in Israeli political discourse, especially among the Arab minorities, there is a conversation, if I'll be polite, going on. There's a political tussle going on, if you look at things going on in our parliament, regarding the possibility of granting local autonomy, cultural or other, to minority groups in Israel. And when we say minority groups, we actually mean Arab Israelis, Arab Palestinians, or Arab Palestinian Israelis. The language here is very sensitive. And many, in the past decade, Arab organizations and leaders in civil society and in politics are very slowly and determinedly working on creating a federal state within Israel. Let's say even the system of the electoral system may change from a unitary one district for everyone to a couple of districts, and then have an Arab district and maybe have some local cultural autonomy, and using Canada as a prime example of where it works, where it may not. That's how the Canadian experience fits into this question.
Now, what about another cultural divide, which isn't present in Canada too, which is the ultra-religious versus the secular? Now, that has a unique aspect because we have a separation of church and state, which Israel doesn't have.
That's true.
And that's another dimension of multiculturalism.
You know, what I do here in my programs, maybe one day it will actually be assimilated in language, I call the phenomena pluriculturalism rather than multi. First of all, so we won't have to think and compare.
Right.
We have a plurality of backgrounds, ethnicities, religions, and others in Israel. Now, the amazing demographic number, the most important thing to look at in Israel today, apart from the boundaries and the issue of the violence, is that in first grade, today, we're in 2010, 50% of kids in first grade study either in the Arab school system or in the ultra-Orthodox school system.
They have the highest birth rate.
And they have the highest birth rate, which means that the voters, they are now, let's say, 7 years old, in 10 or 12 years, these guys will have come out of non-Zionist school systems. Add to that, an additional approximately 25% are in the religious, that some of them are very nationalist and not democratic in their gut reaction to reality. You have only around 25% of kids in first grade who go to a public school system from families that are not Arab, not religious, not ultra-Orthodox, which are usually non-Zionist. Now, this complicates matters greatly when I respond to your question, because we're not talking about today. When we talk today, we have to look into the future. And 12 years from now, graduates of our school systems will have come from societies and from teachings that do not have basic respect for the Zionist nation state, that do not have respect for the authority of the law prior to authority of religious or authoritarian personalities, and so forth. We're into a real story in the next 2 decades.
Well, I was interested, you know, I went to interview a kind of a mechinot that's involved with the training of the new leaders of Israel. Mm-hmm. And in interviewing some people from Orthodox background who were getting education in Zionism, I said, in Israel, why do you need to educate kids in Zionism when they're going into the army or even after the army? And you found out they didn't know who Bialik was. It wasn't part of their educational system. I had never known that till then.
I can tell you something more troubling. It's research that I'm conducting now. I specialize in civic education, democratic civic education. Now, in Israel's school system, there's this thing which is called the independent school system, which is basically the ultra-Orthodox non-Zionist. And they're ostensibly part of the state, but actually they're not. They have their own curriculum, but they get funding from the state. So I wanted to know, what do they study in civics? So how is the easiest way to do it? They look at the exams, the matriculation exams. A question asked by a 12th grader, addressed to a 12th grader, he has to think about the relation between social contract and the Brit, and the covenant at Sinai. He has to think about our relation to the state in terms of the promise given to Abraham. And this comes from an Orthodox perspective, not from a nationalist perspective. These are two different things. So they are taught, the state gives them the language of social contract, of rights, obligations. They speak about rights, social contract, obligations by translating into biblical discourse. Putting aside everything that happened in the 17th century, they go back to Sinai and they will emerge as citizens whose minds are shaped by biblical thinking about modern realities. And I'm saying again, not about modern states, but about basic things. Rule of law, obedience, constitution. It's God's constitution that's also there. You know, constitution is a word that applies to God, not to people like you, a Canadian scholar who runs around the world promoting human rights on the basis of, you know, human values. It's out of the program. Now I'm talking 25% of first grade, and as you said, it will be more in future years. It's a huge challenge.
Big difference. I want to thank you, Dan. Thank you for being here.
Thank you.